get another and another and another and another.
All right, please download the notes document. Use your Cami extension shortcut to open a Cami tab.
Watch them look for hours for number 3.
All right, and open your pre-existing version.
That's good. Who's got pigs?
That's what I was with.
All right.
Uncle David's got pigs. Hold up, I may not even have to buy.
That's right, we are still on the last one. All right, open the last one. We'll keep working through. So that's going to be... Actually, dang it, I keep forgetting that we're that far behind where I usually am. All right, so what you're going to do is... I don't know why it keeps opening all of my modules. All right, so actually we need to go way back up to part 2. Thanks for the reminder, Madison. All right, and download fillable gender nurture side argument. You can use that same Cami tab that you had open. Just drag and drop the different notes document in there. All right, and we are ready to pick up right here. We may need Pear Deck back again. We may not. Still have the session open. All right. So what we saw in your answers is that boys are supposed to be masculine, so they can't wear pink, which we kind of get. Blue might be seen as more neutral, whereas pink is clearly feminine.
Not true, actually. Elvis Presley pulled off pink very, very well.
Okay. Because pink is more feminine, right? Some of you suggested toxic masculinity, and there you're at least getting close to the feminist conflict theory argument, right? Let's see, where was that? Okay. Boys don't want to seem feminine, right? Because it is feminine, and it is not okay to be boy and feminine. Is it okay to be girl and masculine? What do we call girls who are a little masculine, especially when they're little? Tomboys, right? It's okay to be a tomboy, right? And so what gender conflict theorists would say is, look, remember, we valorize masculine things, right? And blue is a masculine thing. So, right, naturally, it's understandable if girls would want to gravitate towards those male gender norms that we hold up as superior. On the other hand, right, for a boy to adopt pink, right, as a color, right, suggests that he is embracing, right, feminine traits, which are not valorized and not seen as good in society. And so that is why, at least according to that theory, girls can wear blue, but boys wearing pink is not as accepted. We've already talked about gender differences being created and reinforced from our earliest days.
All right, 2 people just walked in the room. Can I go to the restroom?
Yes. And
I didn't know if those were the 2 people you had out there.
While we are in school, socialization often pushes boys and girls in different ways, especially in terms of subjects. Boys being steered to STEM, those science and math and engineering subjects, whereas girls might be steered more towards English language arts classes and electives, art classes in general, family and consumer sciences, that kind of thing. Also towards different activities. Right? While we still have, right, there has to be an equality of the number of offerings in terms of sports and things for boys and girls in school. they don't necessarily have the same opportunities in terms of football, baseball versus softball. One that has been broken down is wrestling. If you are ever around school during wrestling season, when the wrestling team is running through the building, there are now boys and girls. That used to not be the case at all. We also see it in work. Different careers. It's not that there are laws that say women and men have to have different jobs, but you tend to see more males as pilots, more females as flight attendants. In teaching, elementary school teachers are almost entirely women. And only as you get towards high school do you start to see that shift to be more even, or in some cases more males. There are also different opportunities for promotion. There's often in businesses what's referred to as the mommy track, where women are not going to reach the same levels of management as their male colleagues, because they're more likely to have to take time off for maternity leave and such, which will kind of take them out of the running for some promotions. Also, whether they actually take time for maternity leave or not, right, or have children or not, right, there's often the perception that they're going to, and so women are passed over for a lot of stuff. Another term for this is the glass ceiling, where women are often not able to rise to the top in business organizations. We also see it in terms of dress. Right? For a lot of businesses, the way males and females dress is quite different. Right? So the male, right, in this image, gets to wear a uniform with little epaulets, almost like he's in the military, right, and a tie, whereas the flight attendant has to wear, right, a dress and a little hat. Totally impractical hat. And that's true. I mean, that's an example from an Asian airline, and Asian societies often have more of a clear-cut distinction in terms of uniforms. That is not the kind of uniform you would see on an American flight attendant necessarily. But even then, right, male flight attendants will wear trousers, and female flight attendants will usually wear skirts. Of course, also different expectations. Men are often expected to argue in favor of their being promoted or for a higher salary, whereas it's not expected that women will do this, and in some ways discouraged. And so a lot of women end up being paid less than men because they are less willing or less likely to ask for what they want. That doesn't mean you won't get it. So for the females in this classroom, I mean, be aware of those expectations, but also understand that these are not immutable forces. You can do something about them. And government socialization also comes in here in different ways. In our society, the most notable is the male-only draft. All of the young men in this classroom, when they turn 18, will have to register with the Selective Service. And it's a legal requirement. Females do not, for now. Although, if we end up in, say, a shooting war with the Russians, and it gets big, and we have to draft people, chances are that law is going to change. There just aren't enough males in this society in general, and a lot of them are in poor health, and so the government's going to have to cast a wider net and take males and females in a future draft. So, sorry to disappoint you if you thought you got to dodge that. And of course, there is also socialization within the family. As parents, the different roles mothers and fathers typically take, right, as signified, right, in this image. It's chaos. Right? The kids are playing. The mother is trying to clean, and the father is just sitting there on the couch watching it all happen. often what's referred to, we saw this way back in gender conflict theory, as the second shift. Remember that there's more expectation that household responsibilities will fall to the female partner in a relationship and not the male. That seems to be changing in a lot of households. For the females in this room that plan to attach themselves to a male, right? Pick one that knows how to cook and is willing to cook and can do other stuff, right, that's useful. It doesn't mean you're picking some kind of a feminine male, just picking a guy who can take care of things. All right. So, conclusion for the nurture side argument. Gender is something that is passed down not according to our genetics. This is not some evolutionary biology story. It's a socialization story. Okay, now, just hang on to those notes. Don't do anything else with the notes. You've either got them at this point or you don't, and maybe you'll get them. But, because I've botched things with the notes, let's just skip back ahead. To biology or socialization part 4, at which point, right, this time for real, download fillable evidence for nurture side. Use that same Cami tab you've already got open and drag and drop the other document. Okay, now, because you may have followed me in opening this before, if you see that, open your previous selected version or your previous created version. And let's see. For now, we'll just leave Pear Deck off. Okay, so on for the evidence in support of the nurture side, now that we've got the argument under our belts. First, in terms of those brain differences that the nature side says are so important. More recent evidence suggests that the only thing that's really different between the sexes is overall brain mass. Those differences that the nature side points out is key evidence that gender follows sex, that the hippocampus and amygdala have different size, right, or larger in males. There are also differences in white matter and gray matter ratios according to the nature side. And, of course, remember those front to back versus side to side connections are supposed to be different, with men having more front to back and women having more side to side connections in their brain. All of those differences that the nature side claims are so important disappear if we control for overall brain size. The proportions are similar between males and females and between different brain sizes. But again, the only difference is overall brain size. Because men tend to have bigger brains, we tend to have those differences that are noted by the nature side. But it's just an artifact of males having larger brains than females. The connection differences are also down to size. Differences between dudes with big heads and dudes with little noggins are as large as the differences between males and females in general. So if you take somebody like me who has a big fat head, right, the daycare workers who cared for me as a small child apparently found it quite amusing that I could walk, right, that I didn't just topple over because of my fat noggin. Like my father-in-law, 6'4", weighs 275 pounds. The only thing that he and I wear in the same size is hats, right? And I know that's a sad statement about me, being basically built like a hobbit, but with Andre the Giant's big fat head. But on the other side, my grandfather did not have a large head. Right? He had a fantastic collection of hats, right? Very stylish hats from his time in the 40s and the 50s. I can wear none of them, right? Because his head was a lot smaller than mine. So chances are, right, if you compare our brains, right, I would have more front-to-back connections, right, and he would have more side-to-side connections. And no distinctions that we observe, based even allowing for men to be different because they tend to have larger brains. None of the observed differences are actually big enough to account for difference in spatial abilities. Right? Remember, men are supposedly better at visual spatial skills. Women are supposedly better at empathy. None of that is going to be down to differences in the brain. And stuff like this, findings like this are, I don't mean just in specific to this topic, but in lots of the questions that you have learned about in your science classes and such. We're going to get different answers because the internet and computers allow for what's called meta-analysis, and that's what Elliott's study is. So, Elliott also finds, hold on, Neil deGrasse Tyson, not ready for you yet. When there have been these gender studies in China and the US, we find that there aren't consistent sex differences. There's something different about supposed sex differences in China and the United States, which suggests that those societal and cultural differences between China and the U.S. may be more important than biological sex in explaining different behaviors between males and females. And generally speaking, studies tell us that people who have found what they claim to be differences between the male and female brains have not been replicated by other studies. Right? It's found in one study, it's not found in another study, and for the sake of time, we're going to skip Neil deGrasse Tyson, but remember, he tells us, if Madison does a study that finds one thing, right, Chris does the same study and finds something else, Ashlyn does yet another study and finds a third different thing, then he calls that, right, we're on the path to nowhere. Right? We're not finding clear answers, and that's what the evidence so far points out. It doesn't mean we won't start getting them, but right now we can't claim to have them. So, replication is that key, and we don't have it here. Again, if you find the nature side more convincing, doesn't mean that the evidence won't come about. These kind of studies are going to go on and on for the foreseeable future. When we start to get lots of different studies finding the same result, then we will know that we have good, valid theories. But as long as we continue to get different results, we really only are able to say that our theory may be wrong. It does not explain the differences that we see in men and women, right, as genders. More evidence, right here, not talking about the brain, but talking about how different sexes are treated and socialized. Studies are showing that that might be more systematic, might be more thorough and regular in society than we previously thought. In studies of how fathers talk to infant females, not just their daughters, but infant females, right, they tend to talk to them more about their physical appearance and their feelings, right, than they do with boys. And you can see this immediately. If you reach the point of becoming a parent, or you have to go buy baby clothes for somebody's baby shower, right, if you walk into a Carter's, and you find out that if you want to buy a shirt for a boy, it might say, "Tough like dad," "It's a truck kind of day," right? "Get out there and explore," right? But then when Lydia goes to look for little girl shirts, they will, and I'm not making this up, and you will find things that say, "It's a lip gloss kind of day," right? Or other things about being pretty. "Drove me nuts. I'm not buying my girl that. She's going to have a brain in her head and she's going to figure stuff out. She wants to wear lip gloss, fine, but she's not going to be pretty and stupid. It's not going to happen." Right? But this is what society does. It tends to talk more about physical appearance and feelings, right, than would be the case for male children. And this, I don't blame this all on dads. Mothers, when presented with an experiment where they've got an incline that their child can climb and descend, and they're able to control how steep that incline is, mothers were more likely to believe that their infant males were going to safely descend a steep incline compared to female infants. And they know this because the women, again, could alter the incline. So they tended to make it steeper for boys, right, but make it gentler for girls. Right? When at that age, there's no difference in motor skills. Right? So it's both. Mothers and fathers tend to reinforce these differences. And a study from Israel indicated that, and this is interesting, it's not about being steered towards different subjects, but it's about how teachers evaluate work. 6th grade girls in math classes got lower scores from their teachers than their work deserved. But, right, on average, 6th grade boys got higher math scores than their work deserved. Right, so the teachers, looking at the same assignments and the same product, right, from students, are likely to ding girls more than they ding boys for any mistakes. And if we think about what this means, well, this means that both boys and girls are likely to incorrectly evaluate their own math abilities. Girls are going to be convinced that they're not as good at math as they really are, and they're especially like to think, well, I'm not as good at math as the boys, whereas the boys are like, well, I'm good at math and I'm better than girls at math, when they're not. And what this tends to do is to reinforce gender biases. Boys will take those higher level math classes and girls are less likely to do so. Now, this is not universal. One of the things that is kind of intriguing to me about Central is the math department. I think the math department is very much dominated by women. Isn't there only one male math teacher? It's just Olson, right? That's it, right? And he doesn't teach. It's not. Who else is there? Oh, that's right, Lanham. Okay, but that's it, right? And look at who teaches the most advanced math. It's Gilliland, right? isn't it Mrs. Gilliland that teaches the upper level, like the dual credit and AP stuff? Yeah, so, I mean, don't take any of this as universal, and certainly don't take this as a reason to play into gender biases. Okay. Now this last one, stop YouTube. I'm not ready for you yet. And I know we're moving through this quickly. The fifth bit of evidence is from cultures that lack a strict separation, right, or a strict dichotomy between the genders. And there are not very many of these. Most societies, most cultures have developed this clear separation into different roles, men and women. A lot of the studies, they have to look at like small indigenous civilizations, some of which don't even really exist anymore, to find cultures without distinctions. But there are prominent exceptions. And in those exceptional cultures, I don't mean that you don't take that as me saying that they're better than ours, but they're exceptional in the sense that there aren't very many of them. They have more than two gender groups in their societies, right? Now, again, this is not common. Western cultures, like ours, and other societies that have been influenced by Western culture, are very much built around that biblically rooted Adam and Eve stark differences between males and females. In fact, it's not just Western, I mean, it also goes along with a lot with Islam, but in Turkish, the word for man is Adam. It's not pronounced Adam, it's pronounced Adam, but that is the word for man. The exception we see is Thailand. Right? Thailand is not the only country that has a Buddhist culture, but there's often a lot of variation within Buddhist cultures. And Thailand's particular flavor contains a belief that allows for a third gender to exist. These are the Kathois. They are born biologically male. And remember, biology, it's not just about the things that we can see, right? It's about chemicals, it's about chromosomes that underlie those differences, right? And some of those obviously can't be changed. You can't change your chromosomes. But they often seek to transition as much as possible to being female. Right? Which means taking different hormones to alter their body's hormonal balance. Right? And brain chemistry and all the other stuff that goes with it. Changing hormones also changes like gender or sex expression in terms of growth of facial hair, for example, and surgery to change their anatomy. And one of the things that is striking about Thailand's example is that this is not something that is purely an urban phenomenon. Right? And the reason that's important is we tend to think of cities as places that are more like open to different ways of life. Right? I don't think anybody would suggest that like probably going to Savannah to hold like the gay pride parade for the state of Missouri is your best move. Right? You should probably have that in like Kansas City or St. Louis or Columbia, right? But probably not Savannah. Whereas in Thailand, even in rural areas, it is common and also recognized as a distinct gender. They do still face some discrimination. But as we'll see, we'll watch a brief video about this. you'll see that in a lot of ways they're able to have prominent and successful places in society in ways that probably would not be really possible yet in other societies. And the point of making this comparison is that this really does offer a strong suggestion. This is by no means like some confirmed theory, because we just have this one existing culture that has this clear example, but it does suggest that the difference, what creates